Hello and welcome to The Birth of a New Dimension. My name is Aurora, and for many years I've been doing this radio show, and every time I say welcome to the birth of a new dimension, and I describe how we are like a parent in the labor process giving birth, and what we are giving birth to is the new realm, literally a new dimension, that is the end result of a combination of spirit and matter. Well, guess what? We have officially given birth. Yes, so what I'm trying to say is that for many years I've been saying, hey, we're in the birth process, hey, we're experiencing labor, contractions, and what we are experiencing now both as individuals and as a human collective on this planet and as a planetary whole, and that includes not only the biosphere, or consciousness that is held in organic containers that, we can see with our five senses, but it also includes the planet herself in terms of planetary consciousness shifting, and it also includes our entire solar system, and it also includes basically all matter and energy everywhere, and especially stars and the stellar network, which are portals of consciousness. So the stars are portals of consciousness, and one's DNA is also a portal of consciousness. So when I speak about the genetic degradation and what happened in terms of, I'm just adjusting my mic here. I hope that didn't change your levels too much. When I'm talking about in terms of the domestication of humanity and the genetic squashing, quote unquote, what that did, it wasn't just that it was the equivalent of taking the strings of a guitar, like turning the knobs on the guitar so that everything went out of tune. It wasn't just that. It was also the repercussions of that being that when we were perfectly in tune, not only whom we broadcasted to whom we broadcasted, but also from which we received was a different source of consciousness. It was a different conversational partner than we have had since after the genetic squashing. Because after the genetic squashing, not only did it introduce the concept and practice of, disease and chronological aging and decrepitude as we move through time, but it also introduced this idea of something or someone that is not our creator, like the being that I call the great composer, the great conductor. There is literally a parent to our bodies, and that's not just our physical bodies, but also our non-physical bodies, like the time field, our consciousness, and everything that we're connected to. Like there really is a great artist that has created this wonderful, dynamic creation that we're a part of, and that there is, since the genetic squashing, an interloper or several interlopers of consciousness, something that intervenes between oneself and the intended conversational partner in order to, change and skew and distort the conversation. And that's been going on for all of what we would call recorded human history, for all of what humanity can remember. Humanity has been in a conversation with an unloving, inappropriate, or aberrant partner, and that's because genes are portals for consciousness. So I'm understanding this more and more in my daily life, that people around us can have a particular genetic recipe that makes it possible for certain consciousnesses or levels of consciousness or entities to act through their genetic portals or through their, like a frequency broadcaster, apparatus, which is what our DNA is. So some people, they might seem perfectly fine. You meet them in friendship, and then the more that you interact with them, the more that they, do something negative, either in speech or behavior or in some way, subtly sabotage your life. And it might be because their overarching conscious meta-personality is like, oh yes, I'm your friend, I'm a nice person. But they have genetic vulnerabilities that are just like vulnerabilities in a software code in, like a regular computer, that allow hackers of the genetic world, the consciousness world, to act through that person's genes and body so that they do things that are, inadvertently malevolent. And this is for most, I can't even say most, let's not generalize. Let's say some proportion of the population inadvertently allows these harmful, negative entities to act through their genetic portals. Some proportion of the population actively cultivates that relationship and does a quid pro quo, rather. They say, oh yeah, sure, I know you're evil, I know you're a fucking demon, and pardon my French, and you're allowed to act through my body and speak through my genetic portals of, my consciousness, but you gotta give blah 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 to me first, like, and maybe it's, wealth or fortune or something like that. So this is part of the problem of being surrounded by poor musicians in the genetic symphony of life. It's not just the difficulty that some people are suffering with disease or suffering with chronological aging. Like, that would be like if you were healthy and fit and you looked at them and you'd be like, well, I see they're suffering, but it's not that they are having an impact upon you. However, once you recognize, it's just like a person can be a carrier for a pathogenic disease. Like they can be harboring a virus but not yet symptomatic, and they are transmitting that virus or pathogenic infection to you. That is what a lot of people are doing, because they're not in control of their DNA in terms of energetic firewalls. That's what virtuosos do. Blah, blah, blah. My mind is not working that well today. My mouth. Virtuosos block out any hijackers from these genetic vulnerabilities and portals, even when they try really, really hard to make you say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing or act in a way, or even just beaming negativity and hatred. And that's what I'm really trying to say. I mean, I think that you can do self-reflection in order to determine whether you're being used as one of these negative portals. And it usually has to do with hijacking some aspect of your ego vulnerability, which could be projecting hatred that is usually your self-hatred of one's own inadequacies onto others. So if person A feels very bad about themselves and they look at person B, who is very joyous, what these genetic portal invaders will do is go through the vulnerabilities in person A's ego and be like, oh, don't you hate that person B so much because they're over there joyously, living their life and being happy and healthy and in abundance. And person A will be like, yes, I do hate them. And that's like basically a hijacking of their emotional energy and their intellectual capacity and their human connection and life force connection, because they're a musician in the band. And if they weren't in the band, if they weren't physically present there with an instrument called a physical human body, then they wouldn't be able to connect on that level in order to be a participant in beaming hatred towards person B. So this is like insight that I'm having on understanding the distorted social structure that is here on Earth right now. But of course, I have to give equal time if I'm going to speak about the negative hackers that can come in through genetic vulnerabilities. And the vulnerabilities are like software. It's like your organic software. But I don't want you to think that I'm a transhumanist, so I'll just use this as my opportunity in this broadcast to reaffirm that I don't equate humans or humanity with an inanimate object or a mere, when people call their bodies their meat suits or like their puppet suits, like to me that is demeaning and devaluing and doesn't show the truth of what you really have. I mean, our bodies have an innate intelligence, and it could be considered like a form of animal intelligence. It's the intelligence of hunger, and it's the intelligence of thirst or sexual desire, or fighting for survival, like in the heat of a battle, or if you're going through a very severe landscape. Mostly people don't have this experience because mostly we're in these urban environments, but if you've ever been hiking in a desert, or in some extreme condition, or if you ever had a near drowning, if you were in the waves of the ocean, the body and the cellular structure has its own intelligence. How about in the aftermath of an injury? If you get like a sudden cut on your leg or something like that, there's body intelligence of all of the immune system responses that suddenly kick in, all of the adrenaline responses, all of the blood clotting and what's happening on a cellular and subcellular level. There are amazing aspects of body intelligence that kick in beyond your mere daily waking intellect that mostly humans identify with as the quote-unquote the me in your me. And I think athletes are highly aware of their body intelligence, but in this time and place, not everybody is an athlete. So athletes are much more aware of, hey, what is the right food to eat and at what time of day, and what food do you need in response to what activity, and also what activities does the body require. Like my body requires, stretching out several times a day, and I recognized at a certain point that it's considered socially unacceptable to just stand up in the middle of a social engagement and start stretching out your legs. legs. So I had to learn, like, okay, how do we mitigate? How do we harmonize with what is considered socially appropriate and still take care of the body? So, I don't fly on airplanes very much, but when I have had to fly on an airplane and you're all cramped up and I'm rather tall and my legs are very long, I always, I'm standing up, I'm walking back and forth and doing everything I possibly can to stretch out my legs. But I understand that that's annoying to the people around me and the stewardesses, but at a certain point it's like, this is the body intelligence, this is what the body needs. And also, I'll take this opportunity to talk about being a walk-in. For this broadcast, I take this opportunity and say, I'm a galactic walk-in. I'm not the initial, participant in conceiving this body and bringing it up into adulthood. I came into this body at age 27, when it was chronologically age 27. And I've had limited experience in human bodies, so I've had to learn a lot about what I would call the animal intelligence of the physical body. And mostly what I see humans doing around me are they override that intelligence. Like they override or they supersede their needs for food or the toilet because they have to do something intellectual. Like they have to either make a phone call or go to their job or drive in their car or do something else. But I'm really realizing it's like if that human agenda of the intellect was not running the show, the body would be a lot more happy. And I really see a lot of disease and aging arising from that basic disrespect of the body's needs. Like when people work overtime and so they cut back on their sleep, that's a basic example of the intelligence of the body. That at a certain point, your intellect will not even function any longer because the cells of the body need that deep, inert time of not moving around and not moving the skeletal muscles in order to regenerate and metabolize the food and clear out toxins. So sleep is basically the animal wisdom of the body taking over and saying, you now have to close your eyes and stop thinking and stop using your mind so that you can actually focus on having a body and continuing to be alive. So all of that in order to say that I had to learn a lot about the wisdom of having a physical, organic, multicellular body when I came into this body. And even, in understanding the dichotomy of how human society asks a person to sacrifice their health and vitality of their body. Mostly nowadays, it's not in terms of being like a coal miner or some, severely dangerous occupation. There are still people that work on oil rigs and things like that. That's really dangerous. But mostly in this time and place, people are asked to sacrifice their health and well-being through overwork, like through having too long of a commute or having to get up too early in the morning or not getting enough sleep or not being able to fit in both exercise and self-care and rest and also having a full-time job. Because think about so many people cutting corners when they have their full-time job. They eat a lot of processed and prepared convenience foods because they don't actually have time to go to the store, buy actual ingredients and cook them ahead of time and prepare them for themselves. So these are all of the ways in which the body is sacrificed and in order to serve the agenda of the intellect that says the intellect is programmed to earn money because this is the domesticated human form. Yeah, so when maybe about 5 years or so ago, when I started to learn more about organic gardening. So, I used to eat whatever everyone ate around me, and then I had to learn much more about how food was affecting my body and food was affecting my neurology. Then I started to get much more choosy about what I ate. Like now I eat a low glycemic diet just because I'm dealing with epilepsy and some neurological problems. But I basically learned through that self-education that a lot of what is in the food supply in this time and place should not be in anybody's diet, and that I should avoid it. And so because I was avoiding things like sugar, processed sugar, and corn syrup, that I ended up inadvertently also avoiding a lot of genetically modified foods because so much of it was made with the corn syrup in it. So then I later learned about how horrible for the body system and the genetic symphony it is to consume genetically modified foods. So all of this in order to say that, basically human society around us right now is set up and intentionally pathogenic. It is intentionally set up to create disease. So it takes a great deal of inner willpower and strength to say, I choose to avoid certain substances in food. I choose to cultivate my body with exercise and rest. Like that is a big one because everyone in society will applaud you and pat you on the back for having 3 or 5 or 12 jobs and, working all the time and staying up all night and pulling an all-nighter. And society will not clap you on the back and give you applause because you're like, yes, I decided to stop my professional responsibilities early and go to bed early last night, or to take time off in order to focus on exercise and proper nutrition. Society would never applaud you for that because society says, no, you must prioritize working for your boss and running after the dangling carrot of money, and that it doesn't matter if that takes away your vitality and shortens your lifespan. And that is basically the program that is running in domesticated humans. Well, I feel like now I should talk about the way that our body is supposed to run, or the way that our lives are supposed to be run. We're supposed to be, at every moment of the day, like a virtuoso artist or musician. Like a dancer whose every movement is graceful and intentional. It's almost unfathomable to the domesticated human because the domesticated human gets up in the morning when the alarm clock says wake up, scheduled according to the boss's schedule, and then stumbles around as quickly as they can in order to, take care of their self-care and going to the toilet and getting their basic food, and in order to hop in the car and get to work on time. Like, all that matters is being physically in their correct location for their job on time. But what really matters is quality of consciousness and how much one's attention is focused and how much one is able to perceive, because we're in partnership with the stellar network. The stellar network is our origin of consciousness. This is big. This is like, hey, mommy, daddy, where does consciousness come from? How do I know that I'm awake and I'm alive and there's something inside of me having this thought? Consciousness, well, Bobby, Susie, sit down. Consciousness comes from the sun and the stars and the stellar network, and that when we're gestating and when we're little tiny infants, we are much more connected to that level of consciousness, which I sometimes describe as numinous, meaning, the everythingness of everything, like just everything consciousness, before we begin to individuate and set up an individual identity and an ego that is like the membrane that separates us from everything else. But really, our consciousness is part of a sea of consciousness, and the ocean of consciousness is that stellar network. So once again, the stars that we see in the sky and the sun that I'm sitting right now on my back porch, beautiful sunny day that I'm so appreciative I get to have the sun in my eye right now. That's not just a giant glowing hot ball of gases. It's not just a stupid, idiotic, inert nuclear furnace that happens to be emitting lots of, radiation and magnetism and particles and, bright stuff. That's science's definition or understanding, very limited understanding of what the sun is and what the stars are. No, the stars are portals of consciousness. They are alive beings. They are points of consciousness. They are like neurons in a great brain. And when I say portals, I mean like doorways. They're doorways through which consciousness flows, coming from one place and going to another, or coming from one time and going to another. So this whole idea of our DNA being genetic portals means that there are doorways of consciousness that flow through our DNA, coming from one time or place, moving to another time or place. So on the one level, that is not a revolutionary thought to share, because humanity already knows, oh yes, your DNA passes down your tendency to have blue eyes through time to future generations. But that's a normal thought in this time and place. But what science is not yet recognizing is that DNA can also carry consciousness, it can also carry ideas or viewpoints or perspectives. And now we're starting to understand a bunch of things, like the aberration that is intergenerational soul transfer magic. That is the dark magic. It's part of distorting the time field. It's basically like saying we're going to transfer this, abstract consciousness from person A into person B, totally bypassing the rest of the digestion process that's supposed to happen in terms of going through the quote-unquote cosmic intestines. You're supposed to go through a refinement process upon death before having another embodied experience, and this intergenerational soul transfer magic is one way of bypassing that system. It's like kicking the can down the road, endlessly deferring the huge emotional and energetic and spiritual debts that one has accrued. And the debts are the type of debts that happen when you eat something. So if I eat a hamburger, I eat hamburgers all the time. I'm not a vegetarian. And I eat beautiful grass-fed beef from cows that weren't raised in confinement and they got to actually walk around and have a good life somewhere. When I eat that hamburger, I am accruing a debt. And the debt is not just to the life that had to end so that my life could continue. It is like an energetic debt. And this is much more speaking on the abstract level, not merely on the anthropomorphic level. So on the abstract level, it's like money or, any kind of numbers system. If you have ingested 100 units, you then need to expel 100 units or expend 100 units in order to have balance or homeostasis. So if we have ingested one hamburger's worth of energy, we then have a debt, and we then need to expend one hamburger's worth of energy in order to be in balance. And that one hamburger's worth of energy includes intellectual and emotional and kinetic or muscular energy and also movement through time. So when people ingest too many calories, they're not just ingesting too many calories. When people ingest too much food, they're not just ingesting too many calories, they are also ingesting too much emotional energy. And they are achieving a debt in terms of that consciousness. It's like you just ate a big bowl of consciousness, and now it's time for you to refine out the higher frequency aspect of energy from that bowl of consciousness and release the things that aren't the higher frequency aspects of consciousness, and like the dead husks, the inert matter. And that's it's just like a horse's job or a cattle's job or any kind of animal like that. Their job is to go around. A cattle's job is to go around eating grass, grinding it up with their moving mouth parts, fermenting it in their many stomachs, and then pooping it out in order to fertilize the ground wherever they walk. And in a very similar way, a human animal's job is to eat the food, grind it up with the moving mouth parts, and refine out the levels of consciousness and emotional energy that are in that food, and then poop out the rest and leave it behind because it is not what can go up to higher levels of frequency. So this is the whole idea. It's also a good opportunity for me to segue into this whole idea of the practice of eating. That eating should not be an unconscious practice because it is the act of ingesting solidified consciousness. Everything that we eat, including if you are a vegan, if you eat nuts and seeds, what you're eating are the potential future generations of the plant kingdom. It is concentrated consciousness in its dormant potential form, like, little tiny fetuses gestating in little tiny wombs. So yeah, there's no distinction. It's consciousness, so we cannot make a judgment on one form of consciousness being more valuable or valued than another, and that is literally what fuels our flight through time, and there's no way to get away from this until or unless we transform or return or retransform into pure light eaters. And I said I'm lucky enough to be outside on my lovely porch today, because the sun is out and I'm getting beautiful, good solar energy and nourishment coming into my mind. And that is one way, like I eat light and I also eat physical hamburgers. And that this is how I supplement my diet, because literally, if in order to do some of these higher dimensional exercises, like the flying rainbow lasagna dance, it requires much more energy than is possible just by eating physical food. No matter how many cups of physical food you can fit in your tummy, there's always going to be a limit. 5, 10, 11, 12, 52 cups of food, and the body is going to require more than, it's like putting coal in a steam oven in order to make the engine go. At a certain point, the engine and the apparatus requires more output than what can be used just from an old-fashioned steam engine. So then it requires a much more efficient source of energy and type of engine, and that is solar power. And that's how we're supposed to run. And I say this almost every week. that before the genetic squashing, in the sophisticated antediluvian worldwide culture, that we were all light eaters and that there was no death and that, we didn't die as individuals and we did not have to end another being's life in the time field in order to continue our own existence. So yeah, that radicalized everything when it became necessary to kill another being in order to support one's own life. So we are transforming again into that original state, but it will be an even stronger position than we were in before, because it was possible before for us to be degraded into this state. So it's just like when you get a cold or the flu and you become sick, but then you triumph over the pathogenic infection and then you have antibodies against that infection. That is what we are all gaining from this experience of being embodied under this great duress, under these constraints, under these levels of constraint, that we're essentially learning how to transcend these limitations, and then we will never have to come back down into these levels of limitation, because it's like we've got, quote unquote, the antibodies to this. And whatever, I don't have to get into ancient mythology. In terms of eating food, so I have a whole teaching in the recorded lessons. It's all about this, and the lessons are called Lessons for Full Spectrum Humans, and the idea is that each one of us is a full spectrum human that has this potential to, climb the genetic ladder and achieve this the full potential of multidimensionality. So I like to say it's not just for one special person, it's not just for one special, the chosen one, like, out of a movie or something like that. It's the potential that is inside of each one of us, and that through cultivating that inner potential, we can be free. That I do recognize that we are right now all on this planet and in these bodies that I would consider to be a form of constraint to the point of imprisonment, and not to be a downer, because you can tell I'm a very joyous person, and I do artwork and music, and I hug and kiss my dog, and I do all sorts of things that are like, life is worth living, eating wonderful food. But yes, we're under levels of constraint in terms of what we can do with our consciousness, what we can do with our body, what is considered possible in reality. And this flying rainbow lasagna concept that I teach people about is all about removing those levels of constraint. And that's what I say, becoming a full spectrum human. It's the thing that we are all meant to be, but that we have mostly not been able to achieve that full potential due to familial constraints, social and cultural programming and religious programming, economic constraints, and consciousness constraints. So, a lot of this is removing the harmful mental software programs that have been placed into us from mommy, daddy, teachers, religions, the government, and science that are, everybody is running the show in this time and place, and replacing them with actual empirical truth that is moving towards freedom. And when I say freedom, this goes back to who I am as a galactic walk-in. So what my impetus or agenda is for being here in the body. Like, Aurora, why are you even here? What is up with that? Why aren't you floating around on a cloud somewhere? The only reason that you get to be in a body is because you have some ego motivation. I don't pretend that I am not motivated by my ego, but ego can be healthy and well-formed. So my ego motivation for being submerged in this level of reality is and was and remains that I really wanted to tell people directly about this new idea that I had invented called the flying rainbow lasagna. That it wasn't enough for me simply to conceive of the idea and then just, move into a state of pure abstraction. I really was like, wow, I want to tell people about that. I want to make it into something. I want to make it visible to them and tell them about it directly, which is like saying it's not enough for me just to have the idea of blueberry pie and write it as, an abstract recipe. I actually wanted to get a kitchen and get the ingredients and roll out the dough and make the pie, and then invite a bunch of friends over and actually give them pieces of the pie and actually serve it up. So I should have said lasagna as a better analogy. That's what I have wanted to do. That's why I'm here in a body. Because, it's very true. You're only in this school, this earthly mundane school, in order to learn lessons. So I've had to learn a lot of lessons about, the body body and how things work and how the economy works and even how language works in order to be here. And all of that has been support structure so that I can share this concept of the flying rainbow lasagna, because it wasn't enough for me if someone else would have taken that basic concept and turned it into whatever, an actual edible pie or an actual edible lasagna that others could eat, that I needed to do that. So I fully accept and embrace that aspect of myself. I'm not pretending it doesn't exist. I'm not, decrying it in any way. It's like saying, I wanted something done and I wanted to be the person to do it. So I'm here in person doing it. I'm not just merely, a remote entity looking down or in from somewhere else and watching someone else make these things happen. So yeah, that's my motivation for being here, embodied in this physical human form as Aurora. In terms of eating food, because I was going to get into this, it's this whole idea of having partnership between the aspect of self that is physical and embodied and has an organic multicellular mouth and tongue and taste buds and, intestines, and the other aspect of self that doesn't have a body, that is pure abstraction, that is made out of time and timelines and just pure consciousness. And the idea is that each one of us has a profound partnership between the organic embodied aspect of self, and I call it non-organic or inorganic, but I'm not talking about some kind of machine-based intelligence. I'm talking about simply an abstract presence that is still a part of you, but that might not be your daily waking conscious mundane intellect. That is what the ego defines as the self, or as me, or a sense of self. That it could be a different sense of self. It can be considered the supra consciousness as opposed to the subconscious, or that connection to the numinous. But this is all about when you actually have access to taste buds and you eat something really delicious. It is like making a digital recording or an abstract recording of an analog experience, or the analog experience that comes from actually being in the body. And being in the body is a wonderful opportunity. It's not a burden or a chore. I know I'm a newcomer to having a body, and I understand a lot of people are so over it and they think, I got to eat food and clean up afterwards and use the toilet. But to me, it is not burdensome. It's not a chore, because this is the place where we actually get to experience all of these, what I'm calling analog experiences, like first-person direct experiences of what happens when you actually build reality from this blueprint of potentiality. Because otherwise, all that you have are musical notes written on a piece of paper, like little black dots that move up and down. You don't actually have the experience of music. So in order to be here, in order to actually listen to music or actually eat food, it means we actually got to be here in a body, and that's a wonderful privilege. It means you can have the first person experience. And all of this in order to say we won't always be in a body. And I teach very much about the idea that we can transcend or abrogate the necessity of death. And that doesn't mean that we'll always be walking around in this particular format. Just like a butterfly is the transformative form of the caterpillar. The organism has not died, but we no longer see it as a caterpillar because, it has transformed into a new form, metamorphosis. So each one of us, right now, we have this wonderful organic body that has taste buds, and we walk around eating food and tasting things, but that's like our caterpillar format. Like caterpillars walk around eating lots of leaves, and sometimes they're very troublesome in the garden for that purpose because they want to eat the same leaves we want to eat. And then at a certain point, they've eaten enough leaves and they go into that gestation process and metamorphosize into a butterfly. And this is what we are also doing as embodied humans. For a certain amount of our lifespan, we have a multicellular body and we walk around eating physical food and having physical or analog experiences. And then at a certain point, we metamorphosize. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we die. This is like we continue our consciousness journey. We have continuity of consciousness. And that is the practice that many meditators from the Far East are able to perform, not only in terms of lucid dreaming, going from daily waking consciousness into nighttime sleeping consciousness, and then returning the whole time, without having those breaks, like those page breaks or chapter breaks where you kind of forget who you are and forget where you were. The Practitioners from the Far East are also good at maintaining continuity of consciousness between lifetimes. So that's why if you read something like someone's title is the 17th Karmapa, that means that that person, that level of consciousness, can remember transferring their sense of self from body to body 17 times as they moved through the time field. But again, I must make a distinction between this natural, non-technological process that is done through cultivation of consciousness and willpower and connection to the divine with the satanic, meaning dark magic, malevolent technology practices that some of these families and lineages use in order to transfer their consciousness from, generation to generation, bypassing the idea of personal refinement and life review and taking responsibility of what one has experienced. So those lineages, they are portals for particular levels of consciousness. They have agreements and quid pro quos that go back thousands and thousands of years, where they're like, oh yes, I will allow you to act through me in this way as long as you maintain all of my investments or give me lots of money from real estate or, make sure that I am the owner operator of this big aluminum company or whatever it is. And clearly I'm not talking about anyone specifically, right? And then you can also understand why those lineages protect their bloodlines and are very choosy about who they intermarry with, because if you're like, well, I have Team X acting through my genetic portals, you only want to marry or marry off your children to other families that also have Team X acting through their portals, because if you marry someone who has Team Q acting through their portals, then it might not be a benevolent partnership. It might be just nothing but constant conflict. So that is the basic of what's happening here. And all of this in order to say that there are really, truly ethical and benevolent beings that can also act through the genetic portals of a person when your body is in shape in the way it's supposed to be. When your guitar is in tune, there are wonderful, I'm trying not to use words like angelic or demonic, but there are wonderful, wise and benevolent and ethical and well-formed levels of consciousness that act through the well-tuned body of a being that has transformed their genes in the proper way. And that is, again, what it used to be like before the genetic squashing, and that is what it is like for most infants when they're still in that numinous state before they download the hacked human operating system that diffuses and bifurcates human consciousness and makes it more difficult to remain connected to the divine. So being connected to divinity, this is analogous to or equivalent of being connected to the stellar network, these portals of consciousness, or the larger neural structure, larger brain that we are like little tiny participants in. And in the end, the big realization that comes is that these other beings that are acting through your portals are actually aspects of self. They're actually you. You're looking in a mirror. One is looking in the mirror, and what is being reflected back are one's own internal characteristics, and sometimes they are amplified or magnified so that we can really see what's going on. And this is also truthful with, what you would call stellar presences, stellar consciousnesses, or otherworldly beings, or extraterrestrials. That there is a wide array, a large spectrum of different types of beings out there, from purely malevolent and completely self-serving and completely on the level of mere survival, to complete virtuosos who have such a profound wisdom of the big picture that they respect the tiniest little potential for life and consciousness, as well as the macroscopic, meta symphony within which we are acting. So yeah, it takes all kinds, and that they're all a reflection of self and the inner self. So this process of transforming from caterpillar into butterfly is largely a process of inner cultivation and refinement, releasing the ballast of who one is not. Like, that's the poop that you poop out, all the husks of the energy, like you've refined out the energy of who you are from all the stuff of who one is not. And then you let go of all the stuff of who you are not. And the truth is, you're not a lot of the programming that has come from your ancestors. You're not a lot of the programming that has come from the immediate previous generation, that's mommy and daddy, not from grandma and grandpa, and not from ancient ancestors. And the ancestors could be, religious, cultural, like, Jewish ancestors from a long time ago, or they could be racial, like coming from another continent, like from Asia or Africa, or they could be cultural in terms of the idea of division of labor, the idea of gender inequality, all of these isms, cultural isms or practices that are completely arbitrary. Like as a walk-in, when I first came here, one of the most difficult things beyond adjusting to the barbarian value system was adjusting to the completely arbitrary, I call them isms. They're just the way that people do it around here. They're just the way that people do things around here. And it's arbitrary, and it's capricious, and it doesn't make sense, and it's just the way they do it. So there's a lot of that has been passed down in terms of programming from generation to generation. And yeah, you get to make a choice, and you don't have to necessarily participate in running those programs right now or carrying them forward into the future. That's the whole point. Your genes are, mechanisms for transferring information and consciousness through time. And it's actually a two-way street. It's not just from the past to the future. That's what science kind of describes it as. Like, yes, your genes pass down the shape of your nose from mommy and daddy to, child and grandchild. They do that. But your genes can also transfer ideas from the past to the future. But your genes can also be affected by events of the future, that it's a reverberation. So now we're not looking at this as a unidirectional one-way road or a flat two-dimensional piece of paper. We're now looking at this like a two-way highway, or like a multi-dimensional folded piece of paper that's more like an origami. And the folded piece of paper can even move and change and transform. So that is the viewpoint of being like a butterfly. You've transformed from caterpillar into butterfly, and you now see this constant, dynamic, ever-changing time sculpture that is alive, that we are a part of, and that all of the food that we've eaten during our physical existence and the experience of eating that food is the fuel for moving forward. So that's why food really matters. Let me just pause for a moment. Food really matters. In this time and place, people have this value system where they're like, well, they got all these bills that they got to pay. They got to do their rent. They got to do their car insurance. They're this, they're that, all of these mandated, administrative things. And then out of what's left, they will buy their food and take care of their physical body. And like, I'm not saying that you should get kicked out because you don't pay your rent or anything like that, but I'm saying like you should prioritize food feeding your physical body, because not only is your physical body what transforms and accretes light into your, eternal body that continues onward, and also the experience of eating food is an indelible experience that we take those memories with us. So again, I'm a traveler from various different times and places to various different times and places, and the way that I travel is not in a clank metal spaceship. It's on beams of consciousness on the stellar network. And when we travel, what fuels our journey is the fuel of love, like love is a tone, but it's also, one moment, love is also a very literal memory, or the digital recording, the impervious, indelible recording of eating food. And so I use that experience of the time I ate fried chicken at my friend's holiday party. It was food that was made with love in a very loving, warm environment, and it was high quality, good food. And I made an indelible recording of me sitting there with my body and my taste buds and ingesting that wonderful experience. And that experience is then available for me to draw upon, even when I've transformed into a being that is purely energetic, or energetic on a different level than what we would define now in terms of being embodied in the material world. And so in the past, there used to be much more of a distinction between energy and matter. And now that we've given birth to this new dimension, we've given birth to this new level of consciousness and new experience of matter that is no longer matter that is separated from consciousness or energy. Now it is matter that is imbued with consciousness and energy. So it used to be a lot more like, well, you have graduated and you are now a butterfly flying around, but you can't really talk with effectively or interact with effectively that which, you came from. It's like just moving into a different level of experience and reality. But what has happened now is our entire reality, everything and all consciousness here has shifted into a new level where we now have the experience of matter that responds directly to consciousness or energy. So no longer is there a time delay. Those beings that used the aberration of soul transfer have mastered the art of deferring or time delay. It's like saying, yeah, there's always a price to be paid, but we're just going to pay that price next year. And every year that rolls around, it's like, oh, we're just going to pay that price next year. Kind of like the deficit. It just keeps growing and growing and growing. So yeah, that idea of endlessly deferring and never actually paying up. But what is happening, so it also used to be the same if you earned good rewards, like if you did things that really, really helped people and saved lives. Oh, there's a loud motorcycle in the neighborhood. If you did things that are really helpful and have really saved lives, wait until it passes by. You should not have to have any element of poverty in your life. There should be no reason why you should have trouble paying your rent or bills or anything like that. You should be instantaneously well paid for all of the goodness that you have sent out. So that time delay has been the distortion of the time field, affecting not only evil beings, people who do wrong, not getting their punishment or their negative feedback from what they've done for many thousands of years, but also people who have done really, really wonderful service to humanity and to life and to the planet, to the time field. There have been a lot of people who have been very selfless or self-sacrificing, who focused on living life with integrity and either healing others or sending out truth, and the truth could be in the form of, writing or music or art or personal expression, or people who wanted to plant a forest that would feed the next generation, like whatever it is. There are a lot of people who sent out a lot of goodness and never got, or are still waiting for, have not yet received the proper payment for what they did. And you think about how many artists never achieved fame or abundance in their lifespan, and then now they're dead and their paintings sell at auction for $26 million. I'm thinking like Van Gogh. That's just painful. That's just horrible. In life, Van Gogh was, a social outcast and lived in extreme poverty. So it's just ironic to the point of pain. So this change that we've experienced in terms of birth of a new dimension. We've given birth, we now are in this new dimension, and it means there's no longer a time delay between what you send out and what you are sending out and emitting and receiving that reflection. That reflection is now instantaneous. And that's always been one of the basic tenets of magic and ethics. What you send out comes back to you, and the only caveat has been in the past, they would just stop the sentence there, but the rest of the sentence is immediately and amplified. So it says, what you send out comes back to you immediately and amplified. But it's like all these things with magic. They would just take it and then edit out the parts that are mildly inconvenient. So, it's like that whole idea, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. That's only the first half of the sentence, because the second half then also says, harming none. So it's really easy if you just read the first convenient half of every sentence and edit out the other stuff that you don't like. So what is happening now is a real enforcement of cosmic laws that have been on the books for a very long time, but that have not been properly enforced. And so there's a nice, lovely, large backlog of justice to begin experiencing, and that's what we're starting to see in terms of social transformation. So just like the caterpillar into butterfly type of paradigm, what we're experiencing in social transformation means that soon our present world will transform into a world that will be almost unrecognizable in terms of comparison to the realm that we have emerged from. Just like biologically, a butterfly looks very, very little like a giant squashy caterpillar. Sometimes the butterfly form looks nothing like the actual, caterpillar form. So what we've been experiencing in terms of capitalism and competitive capitalism, like to the point of pathogenic capitalism, the idea of people selling their bodies and harming their bodies and harming the biosphere just in order to get money for the groceries. that world, that's the world of the caterpillar that we are transforming out of. And the world that we're moving into is this mind-created realm where people have dilated their personality to include the totality of the time field. Because if it was just a mind-created realm, it's like, okay, great, I can now do magic with my mind, so I'm just gonna, smash, murder, and mutilate everyone else, and I'm just gonna use my mind to do it. Like, that's not what's happening, because there's also that transformation of perspective. Just like a caterpillar has a different perspective than a butterfly. It literally sees the world and perceives differently, has different sensory organs, and so it has a different set of personal agendas and values and motivations than the butterfly has. So the butterfly, this is like the multidimensional viewpoint. When you begin to see how interconnected all life and all consciousness is, and how your life relies literally upon the lives of many other beings. And I don't just mean in terms of eating. It's not just like, oh, I got to make sure that stalk of wheat grows so that I can eat it next year. No, it's much more like I have to make certain that that organism over there thinks clearly so that I can share ideas and consciousness with it, or maybe with its offspring, or maybe it needs to share those consciousnesses with my offspring. So it becomes a lot more about the quality of consciousness. Here in this time and place, most people don't care about their quality of consciousness. All that matters is that they get money so they can go to the store, so they can buy food, so they can put calories in their caterpillar body and continue squashing along in a two-dimensional flat plane. But what really matters is eating the right foods. It's not about, something. If you look at a wild animal, and we really recognize the wisdom of wild animals, they don't eat just anything. They actually eat very specifically. They eat not only what is available and what is in season, but they eat the things that their body needs in terms of nourishment, in terms of healing, like whatever herbs or wild plants they will eat in order to rectify out of balance conditions in their own body. And if you just leave out, like sometimes I have left out, especially when I lived in Humboldt County. I lived in a more wooded area. Now I live in a more urban, suburban rather, neighborhood, where we don't have that many, like trees and like little animals and stuff. But when I lived kind of in the woods, if I made some leftovers or burnt something or whatever, I'd be like, I'll just stick that pan outside in the woods and maybe some hungry animal would eat it. Like I thought I was being so benevolent. And I started to notice that like none of the raccoons or squirrels or possums or whatever would eat my burnt coconut milk or, whatever turned south or whatever got infected with mold. And I started to learn, like, wait, maybe these wild animals are actually very intelligent. Maybe they're actually very choosy. Maybe they don't want to eat my moldy coconut milk that's been sitting in the refrigerator too long. Maybe they would way rather eat some nice fresh blackberries from that bush over there. So I started to understand that there is, in terms of the wild, undomesticated animal presence, again, a huge amount of wisdom in what they eat and what they don't eat. It's not just that they're looking for any available calorie to, vacuum up in order to just make their body go. Because also think about that. If you're a wild animal and you eat the wrong thing, you can just as easily die. You just as easily die as be nourished by the food that you're ingesting. So it is absolutely essential to make good choices. So the wild, undomesticated human must make good choices in terms of what life experiences one ingests. Because when you're moving through the time field, you're ingesting life experiences. And if you're ingesting the life experiences of most domesticated humans, which is the alarm clock wakes you up in the morning and you drink coffee out of a bottle like a baby drinks out of a bottle, it's like the comforting mechanism in order to drive to the job that you don't want, where you use your mind in a way that is uncomfortable on a basic level, on a foundation level, that it's the selling of one's mental energy and mental processing power in order to earn money, in order to get enough calories to support the physical substance, the physical body. But what you're supposed to do is think the right thoughts. You're not supposed to think for a boss that tells you, now you will think this thought, now you will think this thought, and then at the end of your day, I will pay you $85 for thinking the right thoughts, and then you will be able to have calories to make your body go. That is like the lowest level of functionality in the world that it is possible to have and still be alive. Because what we're supposed to do is be virtuosos. We're supposed to be artists. And even if you're not a physical visual artist, whatever the thing is you're doing. If you are laying cobblestones, you're supposed to, or, whatever, being a plasterer, like putting up plaster on the wall, you're supposed to do it in a way that is pure artistry. And there's a way to do this. And mostly it happens when we allow people to be self-directed in their tasks. Like when the boss tells you, you must be here at this time, you must do it in this way, you must carry these bricks in this way, you must blah, blah, blah in this way, then it's not done very artistically. But if people have the freedom to be able to perform what we would even consider mundane chores in their own time frame and in a way that is comfortable, many people put artistry into their mundane chores. And this is much more of a old-fashioned or indigenous approach. And I've seen some beautiful pictures of, like, just for an example, stacking up wood for the winter, like how to stack up wood piles in a way that is geometric or sometimes makes a little picture that's beautiful. And that's not just a chore, it can be an expression of artistry. And even the way that you swing an axe, if you do it in the right way, it's like ballet, it's a workout, it makes your body healthier and stronger. But that's not the same as if you had, like, you have to meet your quota. You can't take time to position your body and swing your axe properly. You have to work for your boss and, fulfill your quota and work as quickly as possible. It's a different mindset. So whatever it is, whatever the thing is that you're doing, if you are sewing clothing or making food, or making, doing something domestically, or let's even talk about doing stuff on the computer. There I would say it's a challenge because just for me to do stuff on the computer, I feel like it takes my energy down a couple of notches. And when it's a self-directed task, I can do it in a way that is much more fun and comfortable and not as mentally constraining than if you're like, oh, you have to do some kind of big project, some big web design project or something like that for a client, and then you have to work a certain number of hours at their request and get it done under a deadline, not like working in a way that is comfortable, and then when you feel eye strain, take a break and go do something else. Like, that's the whole point. Hey, P.S., most people are nearsighted or farsighted because of the way they overuse their eyes, not because of genetic tendencies. It is because of eye strain and having to read many, many hours at a time, as opposed to, read for 15 minutes at a time and then take a break. That would be the much more natural, self-loving, virtuoso approach to doing all of this. So, I'm getting almost to the end of this broadcast. What I'm finding out more and more in my own personal experience of being in a body and moving through the time field is that aging and decrepitude happens because humans are doing the wrong things with their bodies. It's because humans are working when they should be resting, or eating when they should be doing something other than eating, or starving when they should actually be eating. Like, I know plenty of people who are like, go, 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 and no time to eat. And then they come home at the end of the day and then they're like, now it's time to eat, and overcompensate by eating too much. It's like, that's not how you're supposed to run your body. You're supposed to eat throughout the day, not starve yourself all day and then come home and eat way too much. Any of these approaches that are considered to be appropriate in this time and place, I consider to be uncivilized, barbaric even, and even to the point of being pathogenic or destructive, creating disease and unhealthy. And it's not just pathogenic to you and your body, it's pathogenic to the time field. Because if you are busy working for your boss in your cubicle for 8 hours a day, that means that you're not playing the guitar, or doing what you're supposed to be doing, or releasing energy that someone else then catches in the form of an idea or an inspiration, because you're busy working in your cubicle, just getting enough calories to make your caterpillar body crawl across a leaf. It's the end of this broadcast for right now, but we are now prepared to create a completely new realm that is made from our minds affecting matter. Thank you.